Welcome to the Super Simple Homeschool podcast, where I help you find purpose in your homeschool while keeping it super simple. I'm your host, Jenny Hedrick. I'm a homeschool mom to 3, and I'm also a licensed mental health therapist of 20 years. I'm passionate about encouraging and empowering parents to homeschool as a calling, rooting their families in the love of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. For more resources and support, be sure to check out my website at supersimplehomeschool.net. Thanks so much for listening today. On today's episode, I am joined by Cindy Puhek to talk about homeschooling high school. Cindy has been homeschooling for more than 2 decades. She has shared her homeschooling journey with others through speaking at workshops and conferences and writing articles in homeschooling publications. Cindy has 6 children and is the head coach of the award-winning Homeschool Science Colorado Science Olympiad team. How fun is that? Cindy, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me here, Jenny.
I am really excited to talk to you about this topic, homeschooling high school, because my oldest is in middle school, and homeschooling high school seemed like so far off when we started, and all of a sudden here we are. So we're going to dive in, but before we get started, tell us a little bit about your homeschooling journey. 2 decades, that seems like quite the accomplishment. How did you decide to homeschool? What ages are your 6 kids? Tell us a little bit more.
All right. So my husband was in the military. We moved to Colorado Springs when my oldest was 3 years old. And I looked at my husband and said, "Do we need to consider school district?" And he goes, "Oh no, we're homeschooling." And that was it. That was when we started. I went that year to the Czech conference, which is now called like the Super Conference on the Family. And I never looked back. Discovered very quickly that the time I spent with my oldest child, we started on preschool right away. Once the decision was made, it's like, might as well. If we're going to do this, let's start now. And she just loved it. We kept it fun. And I discovered that time spent with her was really quality time. So I think the primary reason why, there are many reasons we decided to homeschool, many of which are not academic, but the number one was we wanted to raise our children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. Yeah. And felt like having a little bit more say over some of the influences in their lives, and having a little bit more control over the people that they interacted with when they were young was a good thing. So that was probably our number one reason, but another is just some academic freedom. My husband in particular is kind of a more unique learner and would have really benefited from more freedom when he was young, and he really wanted that for his children. So as far as my kids are concerned, my oldest is 25. She is a professional harpist, and she actually works as a teacher at a homeschool hybrid school where they are in school for 2 days a week and then at home the other 3. My second is an artist, and she just earned a Bachelor of Fine Arts from Liberty University, and she's getting married in June. Wow, to a Air Force Academy graduate who is also homeschooled. My third child is a sophomore at the University of Colorado at Colorado Springs as an aerospace engineering major. He is one of my unique ones in that when he took the SAT, he landed in the 99th percentile on that.
Wow.
And when that happens, you start getting recruitment letters unsolicited from places like Harvard and Johns Hopkins and Yale. Yeah, it was really amazing. And I like to tell people we didn't create that, but we certainly, homeschooling definitely didn't pull him back at all either. I think, well, we'll never know for sure. Did he reach his potential because of the homeschool? We'll never know. He could have done that in a classroom as well, but we certainly helped him reach that. And so he's just doing incredibly well in college right now, setting the curve everywhere he goes. So My fourth child is 18. She's about to graduate. We kind of gave her an extra senior year because her first year was 2020 in high school. So it's like, yeah, one more is a good idea. She plays the violin with the Colorado Springs Youth Symphony and is looking towards pursuing music as she goes into higher education. And then I have a 15-year-old and I have an 11-year-old. So I've got 4 on the other end, and I've got 2 that are very much in the trenches, one in upper elementary and one who's just getting into high school.
Awesome. Wow. That is amazing. I love hearing the homeschooling success stories, if you will. I think homeschooling success looks very different for different people. But it's really nice to hear that, like you said, it's not holding anybody back. And what we know is it doesn't.
Sometimes it's a fear. It's like, will my child be able to fill in the blank with just me? So it's kind of nice to look to my son and say, his mom was his primary teacher. He did almost 100% of his education from the couch. And he's one of the top scholars in the nation. So
that's amazing.
It certainly, yeah.
Yeah. It definitely is possible and not even out of reach. So I love that. So tell me, since we're talking specifically about high school, what is one thing that surprised you about homeschooling in high school? You've done it a few times now, so.
I think now that I'm on the other side, I think one of the things that surprised me is how well they do once they get into college. They do incredibly well. One of the things my son said is, it is just like homeschooling. He's like, wow, because he's setting his own schedule. He was used to that. You really have to be self-motivated as far as getting the assignments done and staying on top of the next due date. Just like he did in homeschool, except now I have instructors all the way across the board. Whereas a lot of times while he was being homeschooled, he learned primarily from a textbook by choice. Sometimes I would offer, it's like, would you like me to get you a course? Do you want me to do some research and find you something online or in person? He's like, nah. It's like, they just slow me down. I'll just do this on my own. Yeah. So, yeah, but he did a little of everything. He did some online, especially foreign language. We did that online. But yeah, so that was one thing that surprised me as they went off to college. All of them have done really well. With my fourth child, even though she's taking a super senior year, she's taking some college classes right now. One of the things, and this is on the other side, is that I realized when she was in high school, if she would become stressed, if she had a deadline that was really weighing on her, we would say, why don't we put these other things off, let you get this done, and then we'll put this back in. Well, that's great. I'm really glad we can do that in homeschool, but I'll tell you, they don't do that in college. And so she really had to learn this first semester how to keep all of the plates spinning. And I realized I think we may have done her a little bit of a disservice by not saying, you know what, let's keep them all, keep juggling all the balls. You've got to learn to do all of them and not just hyper-focus on the one thing that is the most pressing right now. But she did really, really well her first semester in spite of that. But it took a little while for her to get her feet under her, where it seemed like it's like, oh my goodness, we're looking at another all-nighter because you weren't keeping up with this and now it's due and you have to get it done now. So, deadlines for our kiddos can be a really good thing.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is you were surprised at how well prepared they were for college because of the way you structured their homeschooling throughout high school.
Well, yeah, absolutely. They have all of my college students have done and are doing extremely well. The artist graduated summa cum laude with a 4.0 average in college. Wow. She was not my super student either, but she knew how to study. And so she did real well.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes when they get into college and they're studying what they are really passionate about or interested in, their motivation level changes a bit too.
Well, I would say that is one of the things we did in their high schools. As you could tell, I have an aerospace engineer and an artist. And you can't get more diverse than that. So needless to say, it would have been really cruel and a misuse of the freedom we have as homeschoolers to make their high schools look the same.
Absolutely.
So my aerospace engineer guy, he took a lot of science and math, And I tried to make sure he had time for that. That was his passion. That's what he wanted to do. So I wasn't going to burden him with a super rigorous history course or a super rigorous English course. He took them, but I tried to say, let's take ones that are less rigorous, so you have the time you want for the for your math and science. Which he took. He was advanced chemistry, advanced physics. He took some aerospace stuff and mathematics through calculus while he was in high school. Whereas the artist's daughter, art takes a long time. It takes a lot of time just to be able to be creative and to work towards that. Her bent towards art was really obvious, and she knew it. That was her passion. Everything to her was a palette to create something beautiful. And so it was, we de-emphasized. We're like, okay, you have to take this much science and this much math. We'll make it as painless as possible, because it is very painful for you to have to work your way through it. You have to check those boxes. But we are going to emphasize the artistic side for you and give you as much time to pursue that as we can.
Wow, what an amazing opportunity for your kids to start pursuing those passions early instead of having a one size fits all high school experience. And like you said, I think that's really the gift of homeschooling, is that you have the chance to do that. And I think that high school is really where that shines.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the individualized instruction began much more as they hit high school than ever we did while they were in elementary, because in elementary, everyone must learn the tools of learning, which is reading, writing, and basic math. You have to have those. Everyone has to have those. So while I may have had a single piece of curriculum that might not have worked for one of the kids and we had to trade that out, in general, their earlier years looked much more similar than their high school did. Not a single one of my kids, not the four, and I now have a fifth who's now in high school. Their high schools have not looked the same. Not one of them.
Wow, that's awesome. And I think that that's such a cool testimony to what's possible when you homeschool. And so is there anything that you wish you would have known before you started with your oldest when she got into high school that you would have done differently?
Yeah. It's a very good question. I have to think way back, since she's 25, it's been almost 8 years since she graduated. It's funny, her high school was a classical education. She did it all. Latin, logic. And she was very, very good academically and really enjoyed learning. That was her passion. She really loves to learn, which is why she now teaches and amazes everyone at the depth of her knowledge and a lot of in these subjects. What I wish I had known was how to pick what's most important. I think to an extent with her, we did more than we should have, and a lot of it was with her was by choice. It wasn't necessarily pressured, but with her being first, it was hard to know what hills to die on, what was most important, and now we have a much more confidence knowing that, they're going to do just fine. I go around and I encourage other moms, look, they need their 4 core. They need science, math, English, and history, and 2 electives. We tend to overload them as homeschoolers. I think part of it's just out of our own insecurity that they're not going to have enough. And I think my oldest definitely suffered from that, and her younger sibs have benefited that we now know, oh no, they need their 4 core and 2 electives and some free time.
Yeah. Wow. That's awesome. So going to that, this is the thing that I get a lot of questions about, is what is required for high school. And I know this is going to vary some from state to state, and this is not a state specific podcast, but I know you and I are both in Colorado, but we can kind of talk more generally about that. And what do we actually have to do, and how do I make sure they are meeting the requirements to either set them up for having a diploma, going to college, whatever the next path is? Like, how do you help people figure that part out?
Okay, well, something that I didn't mention in my introduction is that I am an academic. I have a master's degree in chemistry, So I went through graduate school myself, and I have been a lifelong teacher. And in some ways, as a homeschooler, I don't like to put that out there because then they're like, of course, you can do everything. You're a teacher. But I have known moms with a passion and a high school degree that have been just as effective or even more so than myself. I have to unlearn all of my what school is supposed to look like according to the way that I was trained. But it just gives me credibility to say, what do I think they need in order to go on to these next steps?
Sure.
I would say that, again, they need to be able to read well. They need to be able to write well. They need to know how to do research. They need to know, when it comes to science, believe it or not, it's extra. So even though that's my background, it's second tier. It's the reading, the writing, and the arithmetic are the keys that open up the history and the literature and the science. So those are the things that while you dish it out, it doesn't need to be a primary focus. But then once they get to high school, if you're not seeing their bent, and if academically it's not torturous to them, I would just, like I said, do the 4 core throughout high school. So you do 4 English, 4 math. It does not necessarily have to be upper math. I would do math at least through geometry if a child can do it. If they can't, and if they're starting to hit a wall, then really start to look into why. My artist daughter, she got math partway through Algebra 2, and then we moved her to, she started taking consumer math and business math to finish off. Then her brother breezed through math through calculus. So it just depends on the kid, but you want them to at least have that tool through if they can make it. And then history, it's nice. This is your opportunity. If your child goes into a STEM field, they will never set foot in a history class again. So the history they formally study in high school will be it. And I know that as a STEM major. They will take very little English. Once it will be all pretty much math and science, and then any type of elective that is forced upon them. So again, keeping the right mentality, and that, what do I want my children to know about history? This is their opportunity to really study it. My aerospace engineering son, he still studies a lot of history, but he just does it informally because he finds it very fascinating. But for now, he does it for fun. But history classes in college are very time consuming, and he doesn't have time. So he would never voluntarily go into one. So what do they need? It really depends on the kid. But here in Colorado, I think they have to have 2 sciences, 2 histories, 2 maths, just to graduate. And then a certain number of hours. But if they are college bound, I would go for the 4 of each throughout their high school years.
Sure. Oh, that's really helpful. I think it sounds like your kids so far are all going off to college. But do you have any thoughts about kids who it's just clear that they are not going to go to college, or they're, looking to a trade or something like that? Would you approach high school differently in that scenario?
Well, I actually have approached high school differently anyway. But
sure.
For each of my kids, the artist, I never expect to go to college. She surprised us. And, decided to go off and earn that degree because school was a necessary evil for her almost while she was in high school. And then she just took off when she got into college. I'll use her as a cautionary tale to never say never. But sure. I know a lot of homeschoolers that their kids have gone into a trade. They are electricians, they are plumbers, they are welders, they work in HVAC, things like that, and highly successful. And so if you start to see one of your children with a bend towards more that direction, I would not let the heavy academics burden them, to the point where, like, if they have an internship opportunity, if they can start working young and this is their passion and what they really would like to do, they would like to finish out their education out in the workplace rather than at a desk. I'm all for it. I think they definitely should. Now that doesn't mean they don't need to check the boxes, but once again, I would find the easiest and most painless way to do it. And then if they change their minds, they have that college diploma, the high school diploma, so that they can go back to school if, like my second daughter, the artist, that's what they decide to do. Um, but yeah, I definitely, as you start to see a child's bent, I think part of the power of homeschooling is to try to give them the freedom to pursue it sooner, rather than sitting there checking really painful boxes. When a child says, I will never use this, and it's really painful, you have to look at them and we all like, you're right. You won't. Let's see if we can change this. My artist daughter, I realized pretty early that learning always came easy for me. I was I was a very good student. I enjoyed school throughout my own education. For her, learning had a very high price tag. So when she looked me in the eye and said, why do I need to know the life cycle of a fungus? It was really difficult for me to say, well, it's just good to learn. It's good to, know things just to know them. It was very difficult because I realized for her the price tag was pretty high. And learning did not come easy for her. She had to put in a great deal of effort to learn the life cycle of a fungus. So it was like, all right, so how do we make this easier for you? Which we did. We got her through high school, and now she's got that BFA and in graphic arts.
That's awesome. I really like that. I think so often, like you said, with your first, homeschool moms get worked up about doing enough. And so we overdo, we try to do too much, and it overwhelms our kids. I see, moms doing that even in the elementary years. I was guilty of that early on in homeschooling as well. And then, you start to realize what really is the purpose of this. And I talk a lot about purpose on my podcast. And I think knowing your homeschool's purpose, and then as your children get older, like shifting to their vision or their calling for their future, and allowing them to lean into that instead of sticking with a rigorous schedule just because that's what we know, I think is really good advice.
Well, I think education is more like it's like cultivating a field where the biggest thing we can do for our kids is to maintain their curiosity, their wonder, their passion. As a scientist, those are some of the most important things. Can you ask questions? Are you curious? Can you do you have the courage that if you hit a wall and the last thing you were doing in your research didn't work, can you come up with a unique idea? These are all things that we're good at as homeschoolers, as long as we don't quench that flame by overwhelming a child with just too much. Academics can always be taught. If a child is capable of learning, they can learn what they need to know as they go through school. If there's any hole there, they can learn it. Our big thing is like, how do we stoke the fires of their natural curiosity? How do we keep them passionate about learning? And I have kids who are not passionate about school. So it's not always that they are just gung-ho for school, but there are things that we can try to do to make sure that those fires don't go out, and not overwhelming them with academics is certainly part of that.
I'm going to take a quick break here and let you know about a resource I created that is now available on my website, supersimplehomeschool.net. If you are new to homeschooling, or maybe you just don't feel like you found your rhythm, I would love to invite you to check out my course, You Can Homeschool. This course includes 12 videos on topics like defining the purpose of your homeschool, deschooling your mindset, and choosing the right curriculum. I'll leave a link for more information on this course in the show notes. Now, back to the episode. Shifting gears a little bit. This is another thing that a lot of people are really concerned about is, how do we keep good records, transcripts? Do we need to have a GPA? How do I know how to calculate a credit? Like, what is a credit? These are really common questions that seem, less important than the bigger picture, but also still important, right? Because, we want our kids to be equipped for the next step. So any insight or tools that you've used to help with that kind of stuff?
Well, from a teacher's perspective. So even right now, I teach some science classes. They're in a university style. I kind of consider myself, I'm not spoon fitting. It's a room full of homeschoolers. So we are just there for the camaraderie of like getting through chemistry, physics, and biology together. In order to have labs, sometimes it's nice to have that in a group setting. It's cheaper and easier. And also, I having a subject matter expert to answer questions is always helpful. But I will tell you this. I am the one who determines how the grade is calculated in my class. So for me, I'm like, okay, I'm going to make your test 40% of your score. And then I'm going to do weekly quizzes, which are pretty easy. They're 20%. We're going to do a final because review is really important. So there'll be a semester final each semester. That's 20%. And then there's a lab score that is 20%. But I do not have time to grade your labs. So if you do them and you are diligent, it's sort of like a classroom participation grade. You get 100% in that slot. Nobody's going to question me for doing that. But as moms, we all feel like, can I do that? Am I allowed? Can I give my child a classroom participation score? That seems like cheating. But if I do it, nobody questions it.
Sure.
So it's one of those things where it's like you need to set up a grading scale. And if you need to give your child credit for the work they're doing, so let's say they're in a math class, they would likely in a classroom setting be getting credit for doing the homework. Regardless of the score they got on it, they'd be getting credit for doing it. Of course, our kids do the homework. It's all homework,
Right.
And then they'd be getting credit for the tests. So with my oldest child, she was an extremely good tester. So because of that, I was able to just give her a score for her tests. It just made my life really easy. But if she had not been such an effective tester, then we would have diversified her score. It's like, well, what are you good at? Well, you're really good at getting your work done. So we're going to make that 30% of your score, just getting it done. That sort of thing. So you need to set up some sort of rubric based off of your child. The curriculum you're using will likely give you some ideas, but always remember that curriculum's your servant, not your master. And I know that's hard to say because we're all insecure and we want somebody telling us what to do and what's okay. But curriculum may not, the way they have it set up, you might be a great curriculum, but not work the way it's set up for your particular child. They all give you permission, make it work. The other thing you can do, and most colleges will not ask you for this, but you keep a class description. So when you say this is English 1, and you were going to set this up independently, and you're like, okay, so we're going to read these 3 novels over the course of the semester, and we're going to use Progeny Press guides to help you analyze it. So that's part of your class description. Then we're going to use easy grammar so that you're learning your grammar and spelling, and a spelling program to help you with your spelling. And that is your English 1. So you write out a description. And sometimes in the class description, you just cut and paste from the curriculum itself as to what the goals within that curriculum are to show this is what our goals are for the year. And just you do that for each of those 6 classes that your kids are in. Not 9, not 12, 6 classes. You do this class description. It is okay to take some of their electives and use them, like music can be participated in the youth symphony. That can be music. Well, I give them an A. Why? Well, they were always there for rehearsal, and they got good evaluations from their instructors within the youth symphony. So, things like that, you can take some of their extracurriculars that we are not necessarily taking place within our homeschools and give them grades for that as well.
Gotcha. Okay. No, that's really helpful. And so, one thing that came up when you were talking that I was thinking about is I haven't ever graded my kids. Like they don't get grades, right? I mean, elementary school, my oldest is starting to, in his enrichment program, get grades and, get his work scored. We have not done tests. We have not done quizzes, right? I have all my kids are dyslexic, so we have different challenges that we work through and around. But, how do you transition kids to now earning grades and things like that? And is there a way to do high school without giving grades, or do you feel like that's a necessary part of the high school experience? What are your thoughts on that?
Okay. So I remembered what I wanted to say. So my son, his first English class in college, the professor came in and said, okay, we're going to be writing these essays. And he had a certain way they were all like, they were learning different types of arguments and persuasions was the backbone of the class, but that wasn't the main point. The main point was to learn to write and to express yourself as in the written word. He says, I do not care what you say. And if you follow my rubric, I will give you an A. But I will also show you how to improve your writing. And what your score would have been if I had done it strictly based off of the way you put your words on paper. Again, we would all feel like we were cheating if we did that. It's fine for a college professor to come in and say, hey, follow my rubric, you get an A. Write this essay and put in it what I tell you to. You get an A regardless of the quality of your writing. But then I will show you how to improve. And sure enough, there were my son's first couple of essays he got an A on, because of course he followed the rubric, but was told, well, this would have been a B, and here's why. You need to strengthen your transitions. These words, you've got extra words in here. But by the end of the semester, he was getting an A both for following the rubric and because of the quality of his writing. So I tell you all this to give you permission. It's like, if you want to set up an English class where you're like, you write this essay, I don't care how good it comes out, you're going to get an A. I will give you an A because you've written the essay, and then we're going to work on it to improve it. So now to answer your question, you said, can you do high school without grades? It depends. If your child would like to go to a normal 4-year university right out of the gate, then you really need grades. They are going to ask for a transcript. They're going to want some verification of those grades as well. Especially as a homeschooler, which typically means a standardized test of some sort, whether it be the ACT or the SAT. Even when they say that it's test optional, as homeschoolers, they want some verification that your child really did do what you said they did. Another way to get grade verification, though, is to have them take at least a smattering of their classes throughout those 4 years outside of the home, where there's an outside evaluator who is giving them some sort of score for their work. And that's another way to do it. However, if your child is going to go from your house to a junior college, normally there's a path there where they don't even need a transcript. At least that's true here in Colorado. My daughter started taking classes. She's still in high school, but even she had an ACT score, but she went straight into our local community college, and they never even asked for a transcript. So whether she had grades or not really didn't matter. My son, who wound up at UCCS, he did try for some of the higher schools, and goodness, yes, he needed a transcript. My daughter, who went to Liberty, yeah, she needed a transcript. So the answer is yes and no. It depends on what their goals are. And how do I transition them to start taking tests? I would do it. I would have them start taking tests. Most kids at least are taking the biannual test they have to take as part of the law. So some of them at least have that experience, but I would have them start taking tests to evaluate their work a little bit even before it counts, before in any way it would count. Just to get them used to it, to get them used to the process of studying and preparing, and then being able to demonstrate their knowledge on in a testing type of setting.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. That's helpful. Thank you. I didn't even think about community college, but yeah.
Well, for my kids, it kind of happened naturally. They all competed in the National Bible Bee, and the way that works, you take 2 different tests. So from a young age, from the time they were 7 years old, they started, I was the same way. I did not evaluate their work until they were in high school, formally and in any way, but they got used to taking that test as part of the Bible Bee.
Sure.
And then Science Olympiad also involves a great deal of testing. So it just kind of, through our extracurriculars, all my kids got pretty used to testing. Some of them are much better at it. It comes much more naturally than others.
Sure. Yeah. I have
artist,
a son who gets very anxious about testing, so we just don't call anything a test.
That is something that you can actually get him evaluated on that, and it may be something where he can get as he leaves your homeschool, it might be something he'll need an accommodation for, because it's not uncommon. Test anxiety is a very real thing. But my artist daughter, she was the champion of misreading a question.
Yeah.
That's not what it says. She would read it upside down and backwards, and yeah. So
yeah, and that's
how to make it.
Yeah, that's what my son with dyslexia does too, is he, mixes up words and then the meaning completely changes. And so, my husband is dyslexic, and he always has to have tests read to him, even for driving tests and things like that. He just always has stuff read to him because he will interpret the meaning incorrectly if he's reading it on his own. So thankfully, my son is able to see that his dad has ways that he has worked around that, and that he can too. But yeah, it's definitely a anxiety thing as well.
Well, I mean, I would try, it's not a bad thing necessarily. Give them curriculum that is actually below them, and then have them take the test, set them up for success. Sometimes don't give them a timer. Don't put them on any type of timer. My students, I only have them like for a couple of hours a week, and that includes lab. So they always test at home, and I say, take it in one sitting, but you can take as long as you need to complete it. So they're not on this really strict time when they're taking the tests for my class.
Yeah.
And that helps. But if one of them did need it read, that would certainly be an accommodation. I would be more than happy to allow.
Yeah.
So it's,
Okay. Well, the last question we already kind of talked about, but I just want to summarize for our listeners today. So the record keeping. So you said it's a really good idea to keep a description of the class, what you're working on in those classes. Keep your grades, and it's up to the mom, who is the teacher, to decide how those grades get distributed based on the child and their needs and strengths. And do keep a GPA with grades, so that if they decide to go to college, they definitely have that ready and available. You don't want to be scrambling at the last minute to create that for 4 years.
Right. And I would also say some outside verification, a class, or 2 or 3 that they have taken outside the homeschool, where someone else has assigned them that score. And you mark that on your transcript. You put a little asterisk, and then below you say this was taken at, this co-op, or this was taken with this person who gave them this score. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So we can set our high schoolers up for success regardless of their path. And I love how you talked about really keeping the high school experience really individualized to each student, and based on their interests, abilities, and future goals. I think that's very encouraging, something I've always planned to do, but wasn't exactly sure how to do that. Anything else you want to add as we wrap up for today?
Let's see. It goes really, really fast. Kids grow up and that they're gone. I think as homeschooling moms, we worry about so much. I would really encourage everyone, take that time with your kids. They do grow up and they leave. And the times that you have built those memories together are really precious. Don't get so wrapped up around the academic axles that you forget to go on that field trip, take that vacation, go do something that they'll remember for the rest of their lives. They're not going to remember necessarily that math sheet, but they'll remember the trip to the mountains, or they'll remember the trip to the waterfall, or whatever, fill in the blank. So make sure you do those things while your kids are still young. Really, our job as instructors is to teach our kids how to learn. There is no way we can teach our kids everything that they will need to know. The body of knowledge that is out there is so incredibly vast that it's an unwieldy burden for us to think that we have to teach our kids what they need to know. I am no artist. Everything my daughter knows about art, she learned A, on her own, and B, through a mentor that God brought us. It's one of the reasons I teach the science classes, is just the realization that it's something I can give back to the homeschool community, just as this artist came and invested in my daughter to help her develop those gifts that I could not have given her. With it, I just don't have that background at all. So our job is to give them the tools of learning, and then just to try to help direct them. My kids know things. My daughter learned photography while she was in high school. I didn't teach her that, but I taught her how to learn. And then I helped steer her where to go. I got her some materials, and then she took off from there. My son is, he was taking classes I've never even heard of, things like mechatronics and things. And he walks in there and he knows what he's doing and he knows how to learn. And so with those things, he's been very successful, going way beyond things that I know or had taught him. Both of my sons are very much astronomy enthusiasts. And when they first started really looking into astronomy, I knew nothing, but I had taught them how to learn. And so when it became a passion for them, they knew how to learn. So that's our main job. It takes a lot of pressure off when we realize that is our job. Their job is to learn. Our job is to give them the tools and kind of try to give them, to help direct them so that they find the resources and the opportunities they need to follow their passions and discover their God-given gifts and calling in life.
Awesome. Wow. I feel so encouraged, and this was super helpful for me as I move into the high school years sooner than I'd like, I think. But Cindy, thank you just so much for being on the podcast today. I am sure that my listeners will be as encouraged as I have been. So thank you again.
Yes. Thank you, Jenny. It's been my pleasure to be here.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Super Simple Homeschool Podcast. Remember, homeschooling isn't easy, but it can be simple. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with a friend, follow, or write a review. Those things really help other listeners find our podcast. I'll see you in the next episode.